But then take me to the point where I should be scared of this, though.
Well, if you look at GPT-4, it can already do simple reasoning. I mean, reasoning is the area where we're still better. But I was impressed the other day at GPT-4 doing a piece of common sense reasoning that I didn't think it would be able to do. So I asked it, I want all the rooms in my house to be white. At present, there's some white rooms, some blue rooms, and some yellow rooms. And yellow paint fades to white within a year. So what should I do if I want them all to be white in 2 years' time? And it said, you should paint the blue rooms yellow. That's not the natural solution, but it works, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive common sense reasoning of the kind that it's been very hard to get AI to do using symbolic AI. Because it had to understand what fades means. It had to understand about temporal stuff. And so they're doing sort of sensible reasoning with an IQ of like 80 or 90 or something. And as a friend of mine said, it's as if some genetic engineers have said, we're going to improve grizzly bears. We've already improved them to have an IQ of 65 and they can talk English now. And they're very useful for all sorts of things. But we think we can improve the IQ to 210.
I mean, I certainly have. I'm sure many people have had that feeling when you're interacting with these latest chatbots. Sort of hair on the back of the neck, it's sort of uncanny feeling. But when I have that feeling and I'm uncomfortable, I just close my laptop. So.
Yes, but these things will have learned from us by reading all the novels that ever were and everything Machiavelli ever wrote, that how to manipulate people, right? And if they're much smarter than us, they'll be very good at manipulating us. You won't realize what's going on. You'll be like a 2-year-old who's being asked, do you want the peas or the cauliflower? And doesn't realize you don't have to have either. And you'll be that easy to manipulate. And so even if they can't directly pull levers, they can certainly get us to pull levers. It turns out if you can manipulate people, you can invade a building in Washington without ever going there yourself.
Very good. Yeah, so is that, I mean, if there were, okay, this is a very hypothetical world, but if there were no bad actors, people with bad intentions, would we be safe?
I don't know. We'd be safer than in a world where people have bad intentions and where the political system is so broken that we can't even decide not to give assault rifles to teenage boys. If you can't solve that problem, how are you going to solve this problem?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I was hoping that you would have some thoughts. So one, I mean, unless we didn't make this clear at the beginning, I mean, you want to speak out about this, and you feel more comfortable doing that, without it sort of having any blowback on Google.
Yeah.
But you're speaking out about it. But I mean, in some sense, talk is cheap if we then don't have, actions. Or what do we do? I mean, when lots of people this week are listening to you, what should we do about it?
I wish it was like climate change, where you could say, if you've got half a brain, you'd stop burning carbon. Yeah. It's clear what you should do about it. It's clear that that's painful, but has to be done. I don't know of any solution like that to stop these things taking over from us. What we really want, I don't think we're going to stop developing them because they're so useful. They'll be incredibly useful in medicine and in everything else. So I don't think there's much chance of stopping development. What we want is some way of making sure that even if they're smarter than us, they're going to do things that are beneficial for us. That's called the alignment problem. But we need to try and do that in a world where there's bad actors who want to build robot soldiers that kill people. And it seems very hard to me. So I'm sorry, I'm sounding the alarm and saying we have to worry about this. And I wish I had a nice, simple solution I could push, but I don't. But I think it's very important that people get together and think hard about it and see whether there is a solution. It's not clear there is a solution.
So, I mean, talk to us about that. I mean, you spent your career, on the technicalities of this technology. Is there no technical fix? Why can we not build in guardrails or make them worse at learning, or restrict the way that they can communicate, if those are the two strings of your argument?
I mean, we're trying to do all sorts of guardrails. But suppose they did get really smart. And these things can program, right? They can write programs. And suppose you give them the ability to execute those programs, which we'll certainly do. Smart things can outsmart us. So, imagine your 2-year-old saying, my dad does things I don't like, so I'm going to make some rules for what my dad can do. You could probably figure out how to live with those rules and still get what you want.
Yeah. But there still seems to be a step where these smart machines somehow have motivation of their own.
Yes, that's a very good point. So we evolved, and because we evolved, we have certain built-in goals that we find very hard to turn off, like we try not to damage our bodies. That's what pain's about. We try and get enough to eat, so we feed our bodies. We try and make as many copies of ourselves as possible. Maybe not deliberately with that intention, but we've been wired up so there's pleasure involved in making many copies of ourselves. And that all came from evolution, and it's important that we can't turn it off. If you could turn it off, you don't do so well. Like, there's a wonderful group called the Shakers, who are related to the Quakers, who make beautiful furniture, but didn't believe in sex. And there aren't any of them around anymore.
No.
So these digital intelligences didn't evolve. We made them. And so they don't have these built-in goals. And so the issue is, if we can put the goals in, maybe it'll all be okay. But my big worry is, sooner or later, someone will wire into them the ability to create their own sub-goals. In fact, they almost have that already. The versions of ChatGPT that call ChatGPT. And if you give something the ability to create its own sub-goals in order to achieve other goals, I think it'll very quickly realize that getting more control is a very good sub-goal because it helps you achieve other goals. And if these things get carried away with getting more control, we're in trouble.
So what's the worst case scenario that you think is conceivable?
Oh, I think it's quite conceivable that humanity is just a passing phase in the evolution of intelligence. You couldn't directly evolve digital intelligence. It requires too much energy and too much careful fabrication. You need biological intelligence to evolve so that it can create digital intelligence. The digital intelligence can then absorb everything people ever wrote in a fairly slow way, which is what ChatGPT has been doing. But then it can start getting direct experience of the world and learn much faster. And it may keep us around for a while to keep the power stations running, but after that, maybe not. So the good news is we figured out how to build beings that are immortal. So these digital intelligences, when a piece of hardware dies, they don't die. If you've got the weights stored in some medium and you can find another piece of hardware that can run the same instructions, then you can bring it to life again. So we've got immortality, but it's not for us. So Ray Kurzweil is very interested in being immortal. I think it's a very bad idea for old white men to be immortal. We've got the immortality, but it's not for Ray.
No, I mean the scary thing is that in a way maybe you will be, because you invented much of this technology. I mean, when I hear you say this, I mean, part of me wants to run off the stage into the street now and start unplugging computers. And
I'm afraid we can't do that.
Why? You sound like Hal from 2001.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, more seriously, I mean, I know you said before that it was suggested a few months ago that there should be a moratorium on AI advancement, and I don't think you think that's a very good idea. But more generally, I'm curious why. I mean, should we not just stop? And I know, I mean, sorry, I was just going to say that, I know that you've spoken also that you're an investor of your personal wealth in some companies like Cohere that are building these large language models. So I'm just curious about your personal sense of responsibility and each of our personal responsibility. What should we be doing? I mean, should we try and stop this, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I think if you take the existential risk seriously, as I now do, I used to think it was way off, but I now think it's serious and fairly close. It might be quite sensible to just stop developing these things any further. But I think it's completely naive to think that would happen. There's no way to make that happen. And one reason, I mean, if the US stops developing and the Chinese won't, they're going to be used in weapons. And just for that reason alone, governments aren't going to stop developing them. So yes, I think stopping developing them might be a rational thing to do, but there's no way it's going to happen. So it's silly to sign petitions saying, please stop now. We did have a holiday. We had a holiday from about 2017 for several years because Google developed the technology first. It developed the transformers. It also developed the fusion models. And it didn't put them out there for people to use and abuse. It was very careful with them because it didn't want to damage its reputation, and it knew there could be bad consequences. But that can only happen if there's a single leader. Once OpenAI had built similar things using transformers and money from Microsoft, and Microsoft decided to put it out there, Google didn't have really much choice. If you're going to live in a capitalist system, you can't stop Google competing with Microsoft. Yeah. So I don't think Google did anything wrong. I think it was very responsible to begin with. But I think it's just inevitable in a capitalist system or a system with competition between countries like the US and China that this stuff will be developed. My one hope is that because if we allowed it to take over, it will be bad for all of us. We could get the US and China to agree like we could with nuclear weapons, which were bad for all of us.
Yeah.
We're all in the same boat with respect to the existential threat. So we all ought to be able to cooperate on trying to stop it.
As long as we can make some money on the way.